any of those that are dotted around the room. Then in part 2, Chris will talk about how we're already delivering on our manifesto commitments that we made during the election campaign, and to set out also how you could help us play a part in delivering that too. Please do take the opportunity to speak to any of the speakers tonight in the Great Mingle, as we're calling it, sessions, either at the interval or after the session. We've deliberately allowed plenty of time for chatting in the schedule to facilitate that. When we've done these sort of things in the past, we found that that's the best way for people to be able to ask their questions, get proper answers, and to really engage with the variety of speakers we've got here for you this evening. Before we begin, I do need to let you know two things. First of all, that the session is being filmed this evening, so if anybody's got, if anybody would rather not be included in the filming, then please do let the gentleman up on the balcony know. We're also not expecting any fire alarms this evening, so this is my ear hostess, but if the alarm does go off, then your exits are here and here. I think that's about it. It is indeed. So with those formalities over, ladies and gentlemen, please let me now introduce you to our Police and Crime Commissioner, Chris Nelson.
Thanks very much, Dave. It really is lovely to see so many of you here tonight, giving up your time to come and listen. Because we've got quite a large number of staff from the constabulary that you can consult and chat, as Nick said, during the interval, and at the end we'll stay as long as is necessary for you to pursue whatever the particular issue is that you're here for tonight. We often find that people come to these events with a specific agenda, a problem or an issue, and believe me, we've got quite a few superintendents, lots of officers, lots of police staff, so there's plenty of people to chat to. In my campaign, before I was elected, I made a big point of empowering communities, trying to help communities get involved, helping to keep their local communities safe, how they could work with the police. And that's really what's behind this evening. I did a little video, if anybody of you was following my Facebook campaign, where I talked about that. I ideally wanted to do this before the summer holidays, very quickly after the election, but good old COVID got in the way, and so here we are now, a little bit later than planned. And it's something that we're developing as we go. I'm hoping to do these roadshows on a regular basis, maybe every 6 months, maybe, or probably with a different theme each time. And perhaps we'll do more locations but smaller to try and make it a little bit easier for some of you, because I think some of you have travelled a large distance to get here, which I'm very grateful that you have. But we're trying to figure out ways where we can make this more attractive for you. So if anybody's got any thoughts and ideas about how to do that, please chat to me in the interval. The first half of this roadshow will be setting the scene. The second half, after the interval, we'll be talking a bit more about that empowerment. So we'll talk about Neighbourhood Watch, Community Alert, Community Speed Watch, and how to increase our special constables and volunteer police community support officers. It's important that we set the scene first. And one thing I've always been aware of, but it's become more apparent to me since I was elected in May, that there are lots of crimes that are going on in the county that people, for one reason or another, don't report to the police, whether that's antisocial behaviour, drug problems, violence against women and girls. I've just done a press release on that subject. There's a real epidemic of violence against women and girls, but I don't think a lot of the incidents that happen on our streets or in our homes, sadly, are not reported. So although Gloucestershire is a relatively safe county. We're about 7th in the list of 43 forces, which might suggest that crime is not a problem. If you're a victim, if you've suffered one of these crimes, and there are lots of them out there, you need help, you need support, and the roadshow is all about trying to help, trying to find solutions, having a frank discussion about crime so that we have a rich understanding of the environment in which we are in. And that leads me on to introduce the Chief. And I was just chatting to him just now. I was immensely proud to witness this morning an operation that was conducted. You may have seen something in the news, an operation in Cheltenham with West Mercia and Sussex against an organised crime group operating out of Cheltenham and out of other areas. And it was immensely impressive to watch this counter-terrorist team, heavy-duty mob, well-trained. I'm ex-military, and this is Special Forces standard. So to see that team operating slickly, professionally, minimum force, achieving their objectives, was immensely reassuring. And I mention it really to reassure everyone that within the force we have that sort of exemplar capability, and there are lots of other examples that I'm coming across that I want to do more to promote, because often the Chief's very modest. He doesn't necessarily tell you all about the great stuff, the magnificent people that he talked about in the video you just watched. We're very well served with the Chief, and I'm honoured and privileged to work with him to try and do our best to make sure that you live as safe as life as possible. So I'd like now to hand over to the Chief Constable.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I don't want to put this too close to my mouth in case it's too loud, but Chris, thank you very much, and welcome to you as our Commissioner, and to you, Nick, as our Deputy Commissioner. You've learned so much in a short space of time, which is a real credit to the interest you're paying in our service, so thank you. Can I also say thank you so much for giving up your time as well. I'm sure there's lots of other ways you could spend your evening, but we're very privileged to have you with us today. We'd like to do a little bit of talking, of course, but in the breaks, please use that for us to listen more than we speak, and we would definitely like to hear what's on your mind, as Chris said. But I think my job as a bit of a warm-up act is to talk about the perspective that I see across the county, but then we'll hone in very specifically to Stroud. So next slide, please. Thank you. I suppose my starting point is that we're very pleased and privileged to be the oldest police force outside of London. I think we're 182 years old at the moment, 183 in early December, and that's important to us because we've managed to retain, we believe, a very close connection with not only our partner agencies but our communities, and long may that continue. Next slide, Frankie, thank you. So just zooming out a little bit, I'm going to wander around a little bit so you can see the screen hopefully. This is, so Chris alluded to 43 police forces in England and Wales. Forgive me if you know these facts and figures, but there we are, where of course you know where Gloucestershire is. We're tucked a bit of an entrance way to the southwest if you're coming from the Midlands, but also a little bit of a through route potentially for some villainy that might occur or emanate from London. And my first point is that criminality rarely respects any boundaries, so making sure that we know what kind of threats not only might carry out crime within our force area, but might pass through it to go on to commit crime elsewhere is quite important to us as a network service. So if we get information that someone's coming through Gloucestershire with a shotgun in the boot and we think that's against the law, then we'll stop it unless there's a very good reason to let it run for evidential purposes. So that's us. There are 43 police forces in England and Wales. We group it in England and Wales because those are the powers of a constable. They're allocated to England and Wales only, but that doesn't mean to say that we don't have very close relationships with Police Scotland, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and we do send people across to help in the marching season and when they have trouble of their own. And I'll talk more on a mutual aid arrangement later in my presentation. But we try and help each other. That would also include other law enforcement agencies like the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, the Ministry of Defence, and British Transport Police. So it's a network, but we are focusing specifically on those 43 forces. Next slide, please. So just zooming in a little bit closer, and you'll know the county well, I'm sure. We have 1,024 square miles to the county broadly. One of the things that we would immediately notice is that we're generally landlocked. I know a small amount of the waterway at Sharpness is technically flowing into the sea, but we're not Devon and Cornwall. We don't have a huge coastline to patrol. And what makes that particularly important is that that must mean that we border other police forces. And you'll see reference to West Mercia, Thames Valley, Wiltshire, and the other forces, including a Welsh force. And we try to make sure that we have very good cross-border protocols with them so that we can share intelligence and information, but also respond to public need very efficiently. It would be odd, wouldn't it, if you were close to the border with Thames Valley and you needed help, and the nearest resource from Gloucestershire was, say, 9 minutes away, and just over an imaginary border, there is a unit that could be there in 2 minutes' time. So we've got a very good relationship to make sure that we try to provide an equitable service wherever you may live or reside or work in the county. And the other point, I guess, is to make sure that we can respond to significant incidents. Chris was talking about a very specialist firearms capability. Heaven forbid, but if there was an incident, say, in Stow-on-the-Wold with a coachload full of tourists, then we want to be able to respond to that as well as we could if it was occurring in the middle of Cheltenham or Gloucester or Stroud itself. Now, each of the police forces will have their own sort of USP, their unique points. You won't be able to read, I'm sorry, the red boxes, but the ones that would relate to us specifically would be, for instance, the fact that we have a very strong military presence in the county, and it's a privilege to work alongside our military colleagues. RAF Fairford, although it's a Royal Air Force base, is technically American soil, and so we rehearse scenarios with the American military. Should the unthinkable happen and one of their high-tech bombers runs over the runway, knocks over the fence and ends up half in Gloucestershire and half on American soil. But we have a very strong relationship with the military, but there's also a security posture in relation to that. 2 royal households, of course. Again, it's our privilege to help protect Prince Charles and also Princess Anne. They're both very, very active royals, as I'm sure you will know. And they get up early and they work late, and we need to not only keep up with them but stay ahead of them to do our best to keep them safe. And we've got some significant events that are unique to our county. The Royal International Air Tattoo is one of the largest air displays in the world. The races at Cheltenham don't just affect Cheltenham, they can affect communities far from there because of the sheer demand for accommodation and the nighttime economy aspects of it. And we know that during the peak of some of the race seasons, up to 24 additional flights a day come in from Ireland alone. So it can swell the population and requires a certain amount of planning. And we've got Stow Fair, cheese rolling, and lots of other events which are unique to Gloucestershire. Next slide, please. This is just an infographic in relation to some of the numbers that we have. These will change by the day, and I'm really pleased to say that it's changing quite dramatically over the next 36 months, because Chris will talk later about the uplift of resources, and they're beginning to pile into the organisation. And they're very, very welcomed, I must say. But as it stands at the moment, just under 2,800 of our colleagues. And you'll see that nearly 400 volunteers, which do astounding work for us, and James and the team are in the room today just to give you some advice or encouragement if you wish to join that rank of 396 volunteers who do amazing work for us. Just over 100 police community support officers, and you'll see just under 900 police staff, special constabulary 115 plus, and about 1,200 or so frontline police officers, not all of which will be visible to you. Next slide, please. Thank you. I've put this slide up because I just wanted to talk very briefly about the changing nature of what's happening in terms of our demand. So, broadly speaking, in 2008, it was a fairly typical profile of work that most of our officers would be dealing with on a daily basis, and I'm simplifying this for effect, so please bear with me. But classic crime types like acquisitive crime, burglary, theft, robbery, neighbour dispute, domestic disputes. Now those still continue, and they still plague us as a society. But of course what didn't happen so much in 2008 was the proliferation of some newer crime types, which didn't even feature in some of the legislation not that long ago. So child sexual exploitation and abuse as we know it now, it's always occurred, but as we know it and understand it now, modern day slavery, human trafficking, honour-based violence, missing people and the prevalence of that and high intensity users, but also cybercrime and the dark web. So some of our officers now not only need to know their points to prove to deal with the classic crime types, they have to be able to knock on the door and respond positively to a victim that says, I'm glad you're here, I've just had 10,000 bitcoins stolen from the dark web, and we need to make sure that we can provide an adequate service to victims of those crimes. And the key point I'd like to make is the list on the right are very personalised crimes. If you're a victim of stalking, or you're subject to abuse behind closed doors, or honour-based violence, it's very personal. It's very difficult to come forward. It's very difficult to explain it and report it without an awful lot of support. And sometimes it can take well over an hour before someone will be prepared to give you their first name. And why is that important? It's important because, of course, we want to provide that adequate service, otherwise it'll be superficial. But to do so takes time. And for the officers responding, more often than not, the radio's still going, and they feel under pressure to try to deal with things as swiftly as they can. But what we won't do, we'll try never to, is to compromise the sensitive service that we need to provide to particularly vulnerable individuals. Next slide, please. This is just a few statistics. We just grabbed a few that we think might be of interest to you. I'll pick on a few. I've talked about missing people, mental health, and high intensity users in society seem to be on the rise to us. We've been mapping very closely the demand that we get involved in. And it's not uncommon for a frontline shift to spend the whole shift dealing with people in crisis, talking people away from the edge of the NCP car park, or dealing with people who really do need medical attention. And we will walk through walls to help them. But it can soak up a lot of resource and a lot of time. And before we start, most days in Gloucestershire, we have about 9 missing people every day. And some of those are repeat people that go missing on a repeated basis, and we've got a better chance of knowing where they might be. Some of them are new to us, and some of them are high risk, and we will stop what we're doing to go and find them. So if that's an elderly person wearing a dressing gown in midwinter, wandering out of a care home with Alzheimer's, then we need to find them quite quickly. If it's a young person who has been groomed and doesn't know it, and has jumped on a train to go and see perhaps what they believe to be a boyfriend or a girlfriend in London, and it turns out that it's a paedophile, then we need to intercept that very quickly, and we do that on a regular basis. Chris has alluded to some firearms operations. We haven't put up hostage negotiation. We deploy negotiators sometimes 3 times a week to deal with people in crisis, which is rarely seen by the public. And I'm going to draw your attention to 2 more on the left-hand side. In relation to murders and homicides, they are resource intensive for good reason, but they're very demand-led. And some years we may have none, some years we may have 4, as it stands at the moment, and other years we may have 13. So it's very difficult to plan resourcing based on something that's completely, to some extent, completely out of control. And we do have a homicide suppression strategy, which tries to prevent homicide, but it's quite a challenging topic. And then just my final point on this one is, if you look at the bottom left-hand side of it, we do unfortunately experience officers being assaulted, police staff colleagues as well, in their roles. about 220 this year, which is unacceptable. And even if most of those injuries are quite minor, and my colleagues shrug it off thinking it's just part of the job, it still hurts when you've had all the skin scraped off your knuckles rolling around in the nighttime economy, or when you've been kicked in the shin or spat at. And there are some significant injuries in amongst that list. So we take it very seriously, and we do our very best to look after our staff who put themselves in harm's way every day. Thank you, Frankie. I talked a little about mutual aid and sharing in the networked environment. So there is no police force in the country, including London, which is huge in comparison to all others, that can cope without help from the rest of the country. So we have an agreement that if there is a significant issue somewhere else in the country, we will assist through what's called a mutual aid agreement. And it balances itself out, so please don't think that we start migrating lots of staff that you're paying for to help elsewhere. We get it in return, and I'll give you a couple of examples. These are the defined capabilities agreed with the government that we need to make sure that we can all roll our sleeves up for if needs be. And that some of them are more obvious than others. But the Essex the refrigerated lorry, if you remember, I think it was 39 people who perished. A huge tragedy. Difficult for Essex police to deal with on their own, and we sent from Gloucestershire a detective or two to go and help them with that investigation. When there was disorder in Bristol, rioting as it turned out, then we were sending resources to Bristol to help. During G7, the summit, that was a national effort to keep those world leaders safe, and over the course of about 12 days we sent about 300 officers, and that's just Gloucestershire. And coming up, I'm going to talk later about COP26 and a few other events that we just need to be a good citizen for. But we do receive help when we need to in return. Next slide. Thank you, Frankie. This is just a point about the best laid plans can sometimes go awry, but we do track demand. We try to make sure that through our daily tasking meetings, we put the resources that we have in the most optimum places to keep people safe from harm. But sometimes things happen, and if I just draw your attention to one of those images, the bottom left-hand image, some of you may remember actually, it was two Russian MiGs that collided in mid-air in 1993, I think it was, at the Royal International Air Tattoo. Now the really good news is that both pilots ejected safely, and that both aircraft came to the ground in a safe location. But had that come down in a built-up area, you can just imagine how busy and how tragic that could be. And just one other complication, you may not be aware, but a very sophisticated fighter bomber, I'm told by the Royal Air Force, when it's whole, is classified as secret. But when it breaks apart, it's classified as top secret because of all the access you can get to its technology and its, the secrets of its design. So when those come down, there's an immediate interest by the Russians if it's Russian, or the Americans if it's American, about what we're extracting data-wise in our attempts to deal with it, in effect, as an accident scene. So we have to be quite careful of stakeholder needs in times of crisis even. Next slide, please. Now, Chris, of course, is the Police and Crime Commissioner. He holds me to account to make sure that we are efficient and effective. But we also have some other regulators. There are others, but I've just listed a few here. And it's to give you some reassurance, really. We are privileged to hold private data, for instance, about victims and witnesses and offenders. And we go to great lengths to make sure that we can keep that safe and secure. Not always easy in certain circumstances. But if we offend against that, the Information Commissioner can and will fine us. And those fines start at about £125,000. So we need to make sure that we're not wasting public money, but also primarily keeping your data safe. But there are others as well that you'll see, which I won't dwell on now, given the time. Next slide, please. COVID, I don't want to dwell on this. I guess you might be sick of hearing about it and talking about it and living with it, but I wanted first and foremost to say thank you very much for you as a community helping us to navigate our way through it, and I'm sure you did the same with health service colleagues. It was unique, it is unique, and we hadn't experienced it in our lifetime, and we made lots of immediate changes as an organisation. Almost within the first week, we had to send quite a lot of our staff home. We need to make sure that our teams were split. If you can imagine, we have a team of detectives. If they're all still working together and one person catches COVID, we could wipe out the entire crime investigation department. So almost overnight we split teams, moved their lockers, their in trays, gave them different stairwells to walk up and down, and we went to great trouble to make sure that we could stay at work. And we were unpicking some of the information about it almost at the same time off the same announcements as you were hearing from the government. So trying to work out overnight what new guidance meant by the morning so that we could brief our staff to be effective and correct was quite a challenge. But it gave us a chance to swing some of our resources into some high threat areas. While some crime levels dropped for sure, incidents in other domains increased. And so when the schools closed, for instance, we have some schools liaison officers called our school beats team. Now, if there's no schools, there's no pupils, but we put them to work going to visit high-risk domestic abuse victims and high-risk offenders to make sure that they knew that we were still around, to make sure that they were safe and to give them some advice so that they didn't feel extraordinarily lonely in isolation and during lockdown. And I'm pleased to say, with the help of the community, we managed to navigate the right style and tone for some quite controversial events. There were times, of course, when people wanted to express their views. Certainly after George Floyd and Mr. Floyd's tragic death, there was an outpouring of grief and there was anger, and people wanted to express those views, and absolutely so they should. But for every person that said, I want to be able to do it, there was probably somebody else saying, I don't think you should let them because it's COVID and we might die if they do. So there was genuine tension, but we managed to work with the organisers and the local communities, and we found space and time to allow people to express their views and keep them safe by issuing sanitizer and distancing. And we did the same with the Sarah Everard vigils as well. So we tried to protect the democratic right without worrying people about complicating COVID still further. Next slide, please. We've tried to retain through the last decade or so a neighbourhood policing presence. During austerity, which the country experienced, of course, together since 2010, we've had to remove about 350 staff and about 30 million from our budget, and that's been quite tough, and there are consequences to that. Now, some forces sacrificed to some extent their neighbourhood policing capability, and we decided to do the opposite. And we felt that staying connected to the communities was the route map to finding out how best we could deal with all the threats. So whether it's theft of milk or counter-terrorism, everything starts and ends in a neighbourhood. So why wouldn't we be as close to our neighbourhoods as possible? And many of your local neighbourhood colleagues are here in the room, and I would please encourage you, if you haven't met them, if you've got a particular issue, they will be very, very pleased to meet with you and try and help you with some of your issues. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of a disposition as it stands at the moment. Now, as we increase in our resources, and Chris will talk about that more later, we're going to drop them into the most important places where you can feel the warmth and the benefit of that. So we're very hopeful and very positive that this will be an improving position, and we'll start to put resources back from where we took them years ago. And just a final point before I move off this slide. Sometimes I get challenged quite rightly about you don't tend to come to the parish council meetings anymore, and we don't see you in some of the places that we used to see you patrolling. And you're probably right, and I apologise for that. Partly that's due to us shrinking a little bit, but we'll try and put that right going forward. But also the situation has changed, like I said to you earlier. You can patrol the high street and make a lot of people feel very reassured, which is very, very important. But we've also got to make sure that we look after the 14-year-old who's being groomed in their bedroom. And you can't do that necessarily patrolling the high street. We have to get indoors to some extent, or online. And we've been trying to spread the resources across to make sure that we can service all of those needs. But we will be back, and we will put more people into the communities before too long. Thank you. We clearly can't do this alone, and we genuinely believe that policing is too important to be left to the police alone. We are very privileged to work with so many. We could have filled the screen 3 times. I haven't even mentioned, the courts and the Crown Prosecution Service and the prison and the probation and other key partners. So thank you to all of them, but we have very strong links into a number of agencies that you might recognise there. And if there's any more that you can think of, or you have a group or an initiative that you think could help us to help you, then please do share that with us this evening. Just before I come to a close, Chris was talking about encouraging us to report crime and incidents. And I would echo that. The more we understand the totality of crime in the county, and specifically in Stroud, the more we can understand what resources are required and what tactics are needed to interdict those threats. So we really would encourage people to report crime. Now, one of the consequences of that is that crime levels will go up. Please, if you hear the headline, don't be too alarmed, because that could be a managed decision. It could be a sign of greater confidence in policing to report information, and we can start to link that intelligence together and look for repeat offenders and repeat victims and start to be much more precise in who we need to target or support. So we'll get more crime, more intelligence, but actually I think it'll lead to a safer county. So it'll start to bring into play the conversation about what do we mean by safe. Is it the lowest number of crimes, or is it something else? And I would suggest it's probably something else. Next slide. On the point of public contact, we're going to be talking with you later about engagement opportunities. We do our very best to keep the channels of communication open for you. We have front offices, we have Single Online Home, which is our online facility where you can self-help a lot, but you can also leave messages for us and make contact. We've got Nev and Kev, which are the neighbourhood engagement vehicle and the community engagement vehicle that go out to the villages and locations where we don't have necessarily a fixed presence. And we do our very best to make ourselves available to you. There's clearly 999 and 101, and I know that we've been struggling to resource that to the standard that we would want to, but again, with help from the Commissioner, we've already started recruiting additional staff to start easing the stress that you might find on trying to get through on 101 in particular. It is a bit of a national issue. 999 in particular is rising across the country, and if we had more time we could talk about why we think that is, but we are very alive to the fact that we need to be available to you, and we'll, as I say, put the right resources hopefully in the right place to alleviate that. And please do look out for some of our campaigns. Hilary Allison and her team are here from our corporate comms, and they work very, very hard on some campaigns that you might find useful. And this was our Click, Call and Connect campaign, and the idea was that you could stick it on your fridge or keep it handy, and if you needed to know when to call us and what for, it was a guide for your assistance. Next slide, please. And as I come to a close with, I think, one more slide after this one, it's been quite a busy year. I say that not to garner any sympathy from you, but just to say that it's easy to forget that, of course, there was, prior to COVID, an election, Brexit, no Brexit, EU transition. We then entered a period of flooding and storms, and the police have a significant role to play when that happens. When trees come down in society, we get called and we respond. When the floodwaters start to rise, we go on to a state of high alert. And throughout the year, we've had many of my staff working 12-hour shifts, with many of them working from home if they had to self-isolate but were still working. So I'm afraid I owe them about 2 years' worth of annual leave, but we're going to smooth that out over time. And G7 I've talked about, the Euros, lots and lots of things coming our way. But one just to put on your radar, you may know about COP26. It's the climate conference. It's a United Nations conference in Scotland in November, and the police service will rally around to make sure that just the right number of people are deployed to keep that event safe and to allow that right of voicing concerns to those delegates is allowed to happen appropriately. So that's a little bit about the year that was and what's coming up, and I think possibly this is my last slide. Our mission, just in case there's any doubt, is to keep people safe from harm. So there is more demand that comes our way every day, every hour than we have the resource to service. So we do our very best to make sure that we triage it effectively, but we will prioritise those in greatest need. And their safety, of course, is paramount. So that is our mission, and we hope that resonates with you specifically. And long may that continue, that we continue to be able to engage in a way that we prefer to here in Gloucestershire. So thank you very much for listening to me. I was very conscious I should have introduced two people at the beginning who are probably sat at the back here. So I'm just going to call two gentlemen up and introduce them, only so that you know who they are. And when you have a break shortly and you mingle amongst them, you might have a question for them. So Detective Superintendent Steve Bean and Ahmed Matheson, and I'll let them say very briefly who they are, please.
Good evening, Ahmed Matheson. I'm a Detective Superintendent and I run the Public Protection Department. To give you an overview of what that is, I will describe it in three key themes. We focus on safeguarding across the entire county, whether that's from children through to adults, but we focus on the most vulnerable within our society, including those that are high risk of missing and mental health. We work on running our offender management schemes, so we work very closely with cohorts of individuals within society that are career criminals, sadly, and or on the sex offenders register. And we work with them to see if we can reduce their offending and put them back into a restorative practice. And finally, we investigate. We investigate predominantly child sexual exploitation and abuse and other complex criminality.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name's Steve Bean. I'm the Detective Superintendent Head of Investigations for the Constabulary. I run 4 departments: the CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Department, the RASO, which is the Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Team, the Economic Crime Team, or ECT, because we love abbreviations, and the Local Policing Investigation Hub. I'm also the strategic lead for things like domestic abuse, rape, serious sexual offences, cybercrime, and fraud. So if you've got any questions about anything relating to serious crime, please come and see me in the interval, or I'm happy to answer any questions just about policing in general. If I can't answer your question, I've got a nice big notebook here, so I'll take your details and I'll come back to you hopefully within 48 hours. Thank you.
And finally, can I just introduce Superintendent Mark Chicken, Detective Superintendent Mark Chicken, actually, who is the local policing commander for Stroud and the Cotswolds, who is going to talk to you about some very specific local issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. It's at this point that my colleagues will tell you that I inevitably feel compelled to explain my surname to everyone. It's not a pseudonym. Who would choose Chicken as a pseudonym? It is my genuine name. So yes, Superintendent Mark Chicken, I'm very privileged and it's a pleasure to be your local superintendent. I actually grew up in the Stroud area and spent my formative years here at school. My father was a vicar in the Stanleys, so I'm very proud to be back and serving you as your superintendent. Before I continue and to allow my surname to drift into your consciousness, I will play a video first that gives you some idea of what policing in Stroud is about.
We believe all policing starts and ends in a neighbourhood. That's why we work with communities in Stroud to identify their needs and deliver a neighbourhood policing service that addresses local issues. We regularly act on intelligence provided by those living in the community to help disrupt serious and organised crime in the county. This includes exploitative drug networks, cybercrime, modern-day slavery and child exploitation. We know you're concerned with crimes that have the greatest impact on you and your family. Tackling burglary is one of our priorities because we know the devastating impact it can have. That's why we have a dedicated team of officers who actively monitor prolific offenders to help prevent further victims of burglary like this elderly lady.
And both my jewellery boxes had gone, and then I realised I'd been burgled. I immediately broke down because I knew what was in there. It was literally almost a lifetime of memories.
There are other crimes that don't just affect you, but impact your community too, such as antisocial behaviour. We are committed to tackling this type of crime with neighbourhood policing teams holding regular cocooning events in ASB hotspots, and also gaining court orders to curb someone's nuisance behaviour. And on Gloucestershire's roads, more than half of fatal or serious collisions are speed related, which is why we undertake regular operations and community speed watches to target drivers who put themselves and others at risk by speeding, using their mobile phone at the wheel, and drink or drug driving. Our officers also police the nighttime economy, regularly patrolling the town's pubs, clubs, restaurants and bars to support licensed premises and ensure nighttime revellers have a safe and enjoyable time. We work hard behind the scenes to try and keep one step ahead of criminals with new and emerging crimes like dog theft. Fortunately, in Gloucestershire, we're one of the safest counties in the country, but we don't want to become complacent, which is why we're taking steps and measures to proactively police and prevent dogs from being stolen, such as our world-first dog DNA scheme. We deal with a wide range of crimes to help keep people in Stroud and residents throughout the county safe from harm. At times, demand on the force is great, but so too is our commitment to do our very best to help protect victims and bring offenders to justice.
Okay, so that gives you a brief explanation of how we operate in Stroud in terms of our local response teams and our neighbourhood policing team. Just to clarify, there are 3 geographical areas in Gloucestershire Constabulary. Those are the Forest and Gloucester, Cheltenham and Tewkesbury, and Cotswolds and Stroud. Each of those areas has a local policing superintendent responsible for delivering policing in that area. We're made up of local policing teams, so in Stroud there is a local policing team which are your responders, effectively. Your teams that go to 999 calls and drive and respond to immediate crisis. Then we have the neighbourhood policing teams, many of which are here tonight, and I'm very grateful that they're all here to support the event, and please do take the opportunity to speak to them. And also we have crime investigations, so we have a detective inspectorate and a detective sergeant at Stroud who can assist officers with their crime investigations, but obviously we're ably supported by people like Armin and Steve Bean from a central crime investigation perspective. An overview of local policing. Now I've included on here a few things that I think are not only relevant to Stroud but to policing as a whole. And key issues, I think, for policing currently. So starting on the right-hand side, violence, abuse and intimidation against women and girls is something that I feel personally very strongly about, and our streets should be as safe as possible for people to use at all times. There is a government survey at the moment around street safe, and if you go onto our constabulary website, you can actually click on that survey and input your details if you feel that you have been in an area where you felt unsafe or where you felt threatened. It's aimed to capture those statistics from women and girls, but anyone can use it. It's not for reporting incidents and crimes. There are other ways you can do that on our website. But I would urge you, if you feel there's places in your local area that you feel unsafe, to go on and complete that government survey. I'm really, really pleased to see Stroud Women's Refuge here at the back as well this evening, who are a key partner in supporting violence against women and girls. So, looking at the top left of that slide, vulnerability, I think the Chief Constable mentioned it. I think there's probably a misconception sometimes that the police spend all their time investigating crime. That's absolutely our domain, and of course we are the lead agency. But actually, after dealing with road traffic accidents, and we'll talk about speeding and some of the contributing factors to that, the majority of the local policing team's time is spent dealing with missing and mental health issues. So actually, we don't spend a great amount of time investigating crime because of those other demands. Policing at the moment is incredibly complex, and it's quite right that you are aware of where we're spending an awful lot of our time as a policing team. And that's not because other agencies have necessarily abrogated responsibility, it's because we are often the first responders to someone in a crisis or someone that's gone missing. I've included specifically antisocial behaviour because this is very much the scourge of neighbourhoods, it's very much the scourge of communities. It's not just a policing issue. A lot of the antisocial behaviour doesn't amount to crimes that the police would necessarily investigate or report. And that's why I've included in there the fact that it needs to be a partnership approach. This is where the neighbourhood policing teams come in because they look at the longer term, more complex issues and working with partners to make our streets and our communities safer and to really empower and grow those communities, which is what these roadshows are all about. I make no apology for the fact I've included partnerships as well as a specific theme, because without things like our community safety partnerships, we wouldn't be able to police effectively at all. So I suspect there are people here this evening who contribute to those community safety partnerships, or CSPs, because we love an abbreviation, and actually assist the police in doing their job. So our approach to neighbourhood policing. Our approach to neighbourhood policing is very much based on early intervention and prevention. It's better to solve a problem before it becomes a real problem. So to do that, we have regular on-my patch meetings. So this is where the local neighbourhood sergeant every week chairs a meeting with the team to look at problem locations maybe, repeat locations for antisocial behaviour, repeat offenders, people that have been repeat victims. And what do we need to do to either target hard on those locations or to address the offending? It's very much about building communities, and there's a picture there of our community engagement vehicle. Two PCSOs that are here today have been out in the schools today doing work, building communities. Now I don't want to give you the impression that the neighbourhood policing is all nice, gentle policing and patting babies and stroking dogs. They have teeth, and it's absolutely right that at times they need to bare those teeth and to actually target offenders and target the people that are causing the most problems. So this leads me on to my final slide, which is a case study of some work that the neighbourhood policing team did in Dursley, the southwest area of Stroud. Operation Nufa was a covert operation that ended up in the arrest and conviction of some people in Dursley that were currying and involved in the supply of quite significant quantities of cocaine. Operation Fuji involved the murder of Josh Hall, who was murdered on the 16th of April this year in Dursley. 17-year-old boy, and there was a 16-year-old boy charged with his murder. Both of those operations took place within Dursley. And what the neighbourhood team did was they created a task group of their own resources and the actual response local policing team resources to provide an increased presence in Cam and Dursley over a period of time during April, May and June. And what they found was that there was quite a lot of people in the community there who were too scared to talk to the police. There was a particular individual who was causing problems for the youth, who was a malign influence. He lived very near the school and was causing a lot of problems, a lot of intimidation and forcing young people into crime. So, in conjunction with partner agencies, such as the Door Project, they took out a civil injunction against this one individual, which is live for a year, prohibiting him from doing certain things, going near other children, going near the school. It's resulted in him having to move house, and it's resulted in us being able to enforce that injunction on that individual, who we identified as causing real problems. And when you talk about empowering and building communities, when the police first went there, there was groups of children that would run away from the police when they went to the playing fields to talk to them. By the end of that engagement in June, July, we've now got community groups, and the children come up and talk to the police officers and PCSOs that go to those locations. And I include in that our special constables, who were a massive presence in that area during the time as well. So that's a real success story, to the point that we're now working with Fearless, which is a branch of Crime Stoppers, Project Fearless, to support the youth in that community. Okay, That's just an example of some of the work we can do. As I've said, you've got a very good representation tonight from your neighbourhood policing teams and the Special Constabulary. Please do take the time to collar one of us and talk to us during the break. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for your attention thus far this evening. Now is the opportunity for our 20-minute break. You should, actually, just before I finish on that, actually, with Mark's mention of neighbourhood policing, you should all be very proud of your neighbourhood team that you've got down here. I don't know if you remember the antisocial behaviour, rather widespread event that happened a couple of weeks ago. I came down to speak to a couple of businesses that have been affected by that and met Paul, who is around somewhere, your neighbourhood inspector, to chat about that and chat about how the team were tackling it. And the team went out and got all the CCTV from all around the town, and they all sat down in a room, and the PCSOs were going through, and they were looking through, and they identified the people that were doing it. And because of that visibility, that knowledge, that confidence on their patch, they knew which door essentially they needed to go and knock on to go and speak to the people that were doing that. So neighbourhood policing is the core of our constabulary, and we should be very, very pleased with the work that the team do. But as I said, now's the time for an opportunity for a break. So if you've got any burning questions, then do please take the opportunity to come up and have a chat to some of the team now. There's tea and coffee at the back, and the restrooms are just around the corner. And we'll be back in about 20 minutes for the PCC's presentation. Thank you all very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second part of this evening's presentation. I hope you've managed to take the opportunity to have a chat with some of the stalls that are around the room, and have a chat with some of us as well. Chris was just saying that he's had some of the best conversations that we've had at these presentations thus far, so well done, Stroud, top work. The second part of this, and while I'm mentioning it, do also take the opportunity to have a look at the draft police and crime plan that is on your chairs as well. Take those home with you as well and have a look at those too. We genuinely want a proper consultation on that. So now we're moving to the second part of today's session, which will be led by Chris, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and he's going to talk about how we're already delivering on the manifesto, the key things that we talked about during that thing. You might have if you have a look at the pop-up ballots on the left-hand side, you might have an inkling as to the sort of things that he may be talking about as we're going through. But there's also an opportunity to talk about things like our neighbourhood watch and some of our citizens in policing opportunities as well. But I shan't steal Chris's sandwiches, and I shall hand over to him now for him to take you through the rest of the evening.
Yeah, I do love Stroud. Every time I come down here, it's an interesting place to live, work and play. And funnily enough, this is our third roadshow session, but I've had quite a diverse and very interesting range of questions that people have raised with me. So thank you to all that talked. We recorded those issues and we'll follow up on those issues. And it's one of the key aspects of a roadshow is not just to talk about the stuff that we're doing, but very much to listening, which is why we do what I call the Great Mingle. And we've got lots of officers here and superintendents, very knowledgeable people, who are available to answer any question really that you've got on policing and crime. So thank you for your participation. Next slide, please. Yeah. I'm now going to talk about my police and crime prevention plan. I emphasise the word prevention because normally these things are called police and crime plan. But I want a strong emphasis as we move forward on crime prevention. And I'll talk a little bit more shortly about the public health approach to crime and the causes of crime, which I think is very important. A key part of my plan is to recruit 300 more officers. I'm going to split it into two phases because some of the problems that were alluded to earlier by the Chief things like the force control room, the 101 answering system. Currently, it's not very good, and if you've ever used 101, sadly, the average wait time currently, last time I looked, was over 7 minutes. And because it's so long, we lose maybe 40% of calls with people slamming the phone down, frustrated, annoyed, and we lose the intelligence. Doesn't help the relationship between yourselves and the police. So we definitely need to improve things. And the problem there is not bad operators or anything like that. It's a lack of investment in that area of our business. We need better IT, some improved processes, better customer relationship management, and more people. So as the Chief said, we've just started recruiting more call handlers. So I've agreed very early on, the first few months of the time since I got elected, I've been looking at things strategically, first of all, figuring out how do we get the extra resources necessary to give the Chief a chance to deliver on his priorities, which I set after listening to you as individuals in the community. But it's not very fair if I just set a whole load of priorities with the Chief and I don't resource him, give him the ability to engage with those priorities and deliver on them, which I then hold him to account on. So in phase 1 of the plan, I've got 200 extra officers, over 100 police staff, and 150 special constables or volunteer police community support officers. Later on, Mark will talk a little bit more about what we actually mean there. When you add all that up, if I can achieve phase 1 and phase 2, it represents a 26% increase in establishment across the constabulary, and I've yet to find another force in the 43 forces that we have who get anywhere near that expansion. So I'll be really pleased if we can deliver that, because the outcome will be that we all live in a safer community. And next please. Back to public health approach to crime, and that's all about crime prevention, looking at the causes of crime. We need to be more holistic in the way that we approach crime, and it's not just about rushing around, blue flashing lights, arresting people. It's about looking at things like school exclusions, mental health issues, drugs, often at the centre of crime, and getting at the causes of those issues. And I've recruited Nick to help me because I'm finding I'm spending more time than I anticipated on the strategic and the operational issues, yet it's a fundamental part of my plan, crime prevention. So Nick's major job is to look at that area of business, this public, what's known as the public health approach to crime, which means he has to reach out and talk to councils, NHS, mental health, the third sector, charities, to work together to see how we can all empower each other to do better. Next, please. Now, violence against women and girls, we've talked about that a couple of times already. It's a genuine epidemic. It's been bad for a long time, but we're becoming, I think, more aware of this as an issue, and I think a lot of women are standing up for themselves and saying enough is enough. We've got to do things differently. One of those different ways that we're looking at this is that maybe 10 years ago we'd spend money helping women to defend themselves against aggressive men. Now we're saying we should be concentrating on the perpetrators, the people that are actually committing these crimes, and focusing on them and changing the culture and behaviour, often of aggressive young men. Also, we want to educate bystanders, because too often, when wicked things go on in life, whether it's in home or on the streets, people witness things, but they don't do anything about it, even if it's just remonstrating with someone and saying, you know, they shouldn't be doing something. So there's quite a lot of work we're doing in that area to make a difference. Working, for instance, with Cheltenham over a bid for government money, where they want to work closely with the nighttime economy and try and make sure that we get better behaviour in the Cheltenham nighttime economy. And I'm always very interested whenever we get government grants to work with councils on joint bids, because often the constabulary and my office have a lot of the crime data that is so necessary in evidence on these submissions for extra money. It's a key priority in my police and crime prevention plan. We've already mentioned the Stroud Women's Refuge, and I've had some interesting discussions during the break over these sort of issues. Nick talked about my plan. On your chairs you'll see a copy. It's very much a draft. It'll be another few weeks before I finalise it. So if you have any comments, either give me those comments or anybody else that's here tonight, or email your comments. We would very much welcome your comments. I've taken a different approach in the plan to a lot of other plans that you see around the country. I want it to be evidence-led so that I can measure what the constabulary get up to and talk to the chief on a regular basis about performance, so that we can actually improve month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year, and make this lovely county safer. Next, please. Rural crime. Now, Stroud is one of those interesting places where you've got urban and rural areas. And often if you live in a rural area, people say to me they feel like second-class citizens because response rates, for instance, are a bit slower. In the past, we've often had a lot of our police resources concentrated in the urban areas because that's where most of the crime takes place. And that can lead to a slower response in rural areas. So I'm looking at working, for instance, with fire stations to see if there are any fire stations that would lend themselves to becoming also a little police station within rural areas, so that we've got a bigger footprint and improve things like response time. We want to double the size of the dedicated officers on rural crime, and I'd also like to see more specials involved on rural crime. Lots of people are interested in that. And we've got a new policy that we're developing. One of the superintendents, who's not here sadly tonight, is leading on it within the force, and we're outreaching and having various seminars with a wide number of people. And at one of those seminars, I met a farmer, a person who lives just south of this area. He's part of a family that have farmed that area for over 400 years, but he's now experiencing a level of crime he's never ever seen before, and it's quite chilling. This is an anonymous video because he feels still to this day under threat.
We've had knives left outside the house, killed hares just nearby the girls' bedrooms. Reports that these people have firearms with them as well. If you have any contact with these people, you have to be very careful. Rural crime comes in many different formats around here at the moment. Predominant problem we have through the past year is poaching. We also have fly tipping, and theft from agricultural yards. It's all big problems. Poaching, the odd rabbit here, the odd rabbit there, that's a thing of the past. What's happened now is we've got organised crime gangs coming out with lurchers, and this is 2 or 3 times a week. We had 44 hits through this winter in this location, and the reality is these are tough, hard people, and they're actually selling the footage to gambling organisations, and this is big money. They will smash locks off gates, they will drive into fields, smashing through a locked gate with their vehicle. They're using vehicles that are unregistered, untaxed, that have false plates on them to evade the police, and they will also chase the farmers themselves. Farmers' wives going out to confront them have been chased off. Farmers confronting them in their vehicles have had their vehicles rammed, and they're also running away from us when we do get together and chase them off. No lights, for instance, crossing the A46 at 70, 80 miles an hour with no lights on. Really dangerous people out there. They definitely have knives. We've got some strong reports that these people have firearms with them as well.
Conservation areas like this one are now targeted by organised crime groups. Video footage of hares hunted in fields like this one is worth thousands of pounds on the illegal gambling circuit. The more farmers encourage wildlife through environmental schemes, the more vulnerable they are to attack.
We were probably getting 2 or 3 hits a year in the past, but this time it's 2 or 3 times a week, and the aggression is higher. If you have any contact with these people, you have to be very careful. On me personally is a variety of emotions, from sort of depression and being really upset about the whole thing to anger and some desire to work with the police and try and resolve the issue. My wife and children obviously hear what happens in the night, and they're at home worried, and then the kids hear the story as I relate what happened the night before to my wife, and they pick up that there's nasty people out there. We've had knives left outside the house where they have killed hares just nearby the girls' bedrooms and things like that. And then obviously on the wider community, it's a similar ripple of worry and angst and damage to our property. It's mentally quite hard to deal with through the long winter nights. It's really widespread. We believe there's poaching all over the UK, all over Gloucestershire, in the Tetbury area, up in the North Cotswolds, and also the Forest of Dean, that there's poaching going on left, right and centre. Where there's wildlife for these guys to target, they will come and get it. We're working with the police more and more, and that's a really good thing. We are really appreciative of their efforts. They're under-resourced in this area. We'd like them to get more people on the ground, to be able to respond better to our calls for help, to target the criminals when they do get them, to be heavier-handed on the court punishments that they receive. That would be a good deterrent. And I think they really need to start taking the dogs and the equipment away from these people to stop the crime in its tracks.
Yeah, I think that's quite a powerful story. It explains some of the complexity of the crimes that the constabulary is facing. I'm working very closely with that farmer and his friends. We've had some good meetings to discover how we can get better intelligence. And then once we've got an indication of where this organised crime group is operating from, I'd like to send the team that I was working with or watching this morning on a little trip to return the favour and arrest these people and then send them to court and lock them up for a very long time. A lot of the people that are involved with cruelty to animals often then develop into very serious criminals who do much worse without any foibles at all. So this is an important issue that we need to get on top of. Now, dog theft. How many dog owners do we have in the audience? Oh, I thought there'd be a few more than that. I'm a dog owner, Chief's a dog owner. We've done the Doggy DNA initiative, which is advertised just at the back. A new world-leading initiative to work in conjunction with the chips in dogs, which should give greater protection against dog theft. And after I was elected, I also worked very closely with the government in the Pet Theft Task Force, which led to a change, well, an announcement of the intention to change the law on pet abduction, which I think with that new law, concentrating on the welfare of the animal as a sentient being and recognising the social and emotional value of the animal, that it will lead to more serious, long sentences, which we need to do if we're going to stop the organised criminals getting involved in dog theft. Next, please. Unauthorised encampments, some areas worse than in others. This is an example where we need to work together with councils, make sure, for instance, that there are enough transit sites within each area, and do more to make sure that those sites that engage in criminal activity are addressed. Next, please. And I'll now hand over to Bob Lloyd, very experienced individual, and I'm putting him under a lot of pressure to try and grow Neighbourhood Watch and your community alert system, and he seems to be doing better at each venue that we go to as he works his magic. So Bob, over to you.
Thank you very much. No pressure then. I'm Bob Lloyd, and I'm one of 4 Neighbourhood Watch officers that look after Neighbourhood Watch in the county. My colleague Simon over there is also one of the officers. And my role this evening is to encourage you to join Neighbourhood Watch. Well, I must say, you're all doing rather well anyway, because you have in the Stroud area, put my glasses on for this bit, we had 225 at the start of the evening. We now have 3 more, because that's 3 more people saying that they'll start schemes here this evening. So there's 3 definites, and I've had 2 maybes as well. So I'm hoping the maybes will come through before the week is out, perhaps. The map on the screen shows the distribution of the schemes that we have across the Stroud district. And we pulled these maps off community alerts. Now, I know many of you probably already belong to neighbourhood alerts or community alerts, but Neighbourhood Watch sort of adds to the kind of messages that you get. So if you're not a member of community alerts, I would recommend that you sign up and join us, and we can also join you at the table over there on the right-hand side of the room. The map is really useful to us because it shows us where we have schemes, and it also shows us where we have perhaps not so many schemes. So if you recognise you sort of live in one of the areas where we don't have a purple blob, then maybe you should come and have a chat to us. Now, Chris is right, we've done really well in the course of the 3 roadshows that we've had so far, and I mentioned to him yesterday that maybe we should be doing them perhaps more regularly so we can grow the network more quickly. But seriously, Neighbourhood Watch is an excellent community building tool. It cements 2-way communications with the local police. It builds stronger and safer communities, reduces crime and the fear of crime, and it can improve the quality of life. Easy for me to say, but we have a short video now which shows the effect that Neighbourhood Watch had in Kingsway in Gloucester just 12 months ago.
Kingsway in Gloucester, home to pubs, schools, supermarkets and countless families. The area is one of the largest housing estates in the UK, and it keeps growing. But so is its Neighbourhood Watch community.
So we had a number of problems reported to us back last year. We had antisocial behaviour involving kids going around, we had antisocial behaviour with motorcyclists on the path, and we've had a bit of drug abuse. What we want to do is engage with the public in a positive note. So we went out there, yes, they were frustrated, but actually it showed that people wanted to make a difference in the area, and that's where Neighbourhood Watch comes in.
There are now 17 Neighbourhood Watch groups covering Kingsway, all of which were set up within 6 months of antisocial behaviour in the area.
It looks safer, with the newsletters and with the police action. It feels like the police are really invested in making this a safer area.
Neighbourhood Watch is definitely about the community, not just about the crimes. Because if you look at the community, I think it will probably reduce the crime. People want to make a difference, they want to make it a nice area to live in.
Now, younger people are setting up watch groups. They're meeting their neighbours, they're building communities. With group management taking as little as an hour a week, Neighbourhood Watch coordinators are now using digital channels to keep their communities safe and informed.
A WhatsApp group where people are chatting about this, that and the other aren't always, as formal as we need to be. If somebody does have an incident and a policeman does have to attend, and you get one email that says this is what's happened, from there you've got it formalised.
I think it gives communities a sense of security, a sense of togetherness as well, which is as important as aspects of trying to reduce crime and the fear of crime. So what it really promotes actually is connectivity. It's really important that we make sure that we connect and look after each other, and that is something that reaches far wider than just policing.
Sadly, I think only about 1 in 6 households are in Neighbourhood Watch and use the community alert system, and I would love to use these roadshows to promote both of those schemes so more people take up Neighbourhood Watch.
It's free and simple to set up a group in your area, where you'll get direct support from Gloucestershire Constabulary's Neighbourhood Watch officers.
This just goes to show some of the advantages of Neighbourhood Watch, and I think the figure said that 17 schemes started in Kingsway. It's actually increased to about 30 now, so we've had a huge increase since this video was made, and we got a bit of national notoriety from it as well. On the screen you see the kinds of measures that we can put out through community alerts, and we deal with the traditional crime, burglary and theft from motor vehicles, but we also deal with the modern types of crime, the scams, the cyber crimes, and we occasionally ask for help from Neighbourhood Watch. And Gloucester's had a particular problem just lately with police courier fraud, which you've probably heard about on the news. And they've had a real big problem. So we've asked the coordinators for help in distributing one of the leaflets that we've got for that problem. And we had a resounding response with over 30 of the coordinators came back to us straight away. And they've helped us distribute over 3,000 of these notices to neighbours in their area. Some national research done a little while ago showed that when Neighbourhood Watch is effective, it can reduce crime between 16 and 25%, which is quite a significant factor, I think. And also some research done by National Neighbourhood Watch Association said they wanted to know why people never joined Neighbourhood Watch. And the resounding answer was, well, you never asked us. So I'm asking you now tonight to think about it, please, and come and see us at the table, and we will help you through the process, give you some more information, and also Simon has got some inexpensive crime reduction items that he's happy to sell you for a very nominal sum. Thank you.
So even if you don't sign up to Neighbourhood Watch, I think if you're not signed up to the community alert system, and probably most of you, I would guess, are probably not. There's only about 18,000, I think, in the whole county signed up. That is probably the simplest thing you can do. Just give Bob your email address, and then you'll get regular alerts about what's happening, for instance, on scams. Most of us, with our texts, emails, computers, our home phones, we get swamped, I certainly do, with all manner of scams. And if you're living a busy life, rushing from one thing to the next, it's very easy to be taken in by some of the more sophisticated scams, which change the nature on a regular basis. And your community alert will keep you up to date with what's going on in Gloucestershire, in your community. And the groups, whether it's international groups or local groups, they can be very specific in the targeted areas. So your community alert system will keep you better informed and help to keep you safer from scams. Now, moving on to Community Speedwatch. It's the second big issue that I want to talk to you about tonight. Over the years I've been involved with the police, people will often talk to me about persistent speeding in their areas. Now, the four main killers that we have to worry about: speeding, mobile phones while you're driving, not wearing a seatbelt, and people who drink or take drugs while they drive. Do those sort of things, you have the sort of results. Next please. The consequences. So last year on our roads in Gloucestershire we lost 23 people and quite a lot of seriously injured. Those 23 people, that's 6 times more than we had murders last year. So we need to do something about this particular problem. So on Community Speed Watch, that's something you can volunteer for. We have the team at the back, very experienced team, and they can talk to you, take your name if you're interested in getting involved. Basically, you do regular patrols, wear a yellow jacket, and you have what looks like a hairdryer, a radar system that you point at a car to obtain information about their speeds. That information then goes back into the police system, and if traffic is speeding, then we can send out warning letters to those speeding offenders. And if that doesn't work, we can send police to knock on their doors and talk to them about their problem that they're repeating. If that fails, then we can deploy the enforcement team with their official laser-operated system, which allows the police to issue enforcement fines, and that normally does the trick. Doing that sort of community speed watch is not everyone's cup of tea, and there are other systems out there, low-cost, high-technology systems. There's 2 or 3 at least that I know about, and I can chat to you afterwards if you're interested. And you can deploy those systems on lampposts in your areas. Parish councils, for instance, often have a pot of gold that they can use to purchase these systems. They're very low cost, and that will do the same sort of role as a community speed watch with the hairdryer. It will monitor traffic and pass the speeding information to the police, and then you go through the same process. If you're a really rich parish, then perhaps you can afford an ANPR, automatic number plate recognition system, a much more sophisticated device, but it's a lot more expensive. So there are a range of solutions. You can talk to highways about traffic calming. You can talk to highways about introducing 20-mile-per-hour limits, a whole range of issues. But I think we need to work together, the community that's got the problem and wants to try and solve it. The constabulary can help with support when talking to highways, because highways run the roads, and we need to work together to make sure that we find the right solution to deal with speeding so we can all live a safer life. Next, please. And I'll now hand back to Mark, who's going to talk about another of my passions, citizens in policing and cadets and special constables. So over to you.
Thank you. I won't mention my surname this time, I promise. We've done that. So first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge the history that Gloucestershire Constabulary has around citizens in policing. And by citizens in policing, I'm talking about volunteers, so people that give up their time to assist the constabulary free of charge. And that's basically what citizens in policing is. There are three main ways that you can volunteer currently for Gloucestershire Constabulary. That is through the Special Constabulary, of which we currently have 115 special constables. It is through the cadet scheme, which we currently have 151 cadets and 61 leaders, or by being a police support volunteer, of which we've got 246, and we are the largest force in the southwest region in terms of our total numbers of volunteers. It would be remiss at this point if I didn't mention, as part of the cadets, the treasure seekers, and we've got the High Sheriff's cadet here, Jamie, who will stand up and give you all a wave. Hi, Jamie. That's an extremely important position, and thank you very much, Jamie, for coming to all of these roadshows.
Thank you for coming tonight too.
Thank you very much. So, why volunteer, first of all? Well, I would venture that you all have skills that you can bring to policing. And you're currently sat on those skills, which we would benefit from. It's rewarding, it enables you to undertake your civic duty, and it enables us, perhaps most importantly, to have a workforce that is reflective of the communities that we serve. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of the volunteering opportunities that we currently have and those we would like to develop. And all I'd ask from you, and this is a bit of a shameless pitch, is to go away and have a think about ways you might like to be able to help your local police. And for people that aren't here, perhaps have a look at some of these schemes as I quickly talk through them and think about those people who may wish to volunteer to assist us under any of these schemes. So I think if I start on the right-hand side, so the Special Constabulary, I've said we have 115 special constables at the moment. They provide around about 50,000 hours of support to Gloucestershire Police every year. During the first 3 months of COVID last year, they provided 15,000 hours of policing to the local constabulary. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the Special Constabulary. The Chief Officer is here tonight, David Pedrick-Friend, as is the Chief Inspector of the Special Constabulary, Steve Lindsay. And I also should mention Brian, who has served 48 years as a Special Constable. Thank you, Brian. Ways of developing the Special Constabulary include encouraging people to sign up to be a parish Special Constable. And that brings me on to the next slide on the bottom right there. Sorry, not the next slide, Frankie, go back. We've got the volunteer PCSOs. So this is a scheme that we're looking to develop. So people who are able to volunteer as a PCSO within their local community to assist us in keeping that community safe and building that community. Now, as we develop the policy, I would ask if you have interest in joining us to go and see James and sign up today, and as the policy develops, we will explain to you more about how we see the volunteer PCSO role developing. But this is a key area for us to gain more volunteers who can work within their local area with local PCSOs and with local police officers as part of the neighbourhood teams you've heard so much about tonight. On the right-hand side, you have the ride-along scheme. So this is the opportunity for people to come and spend a shift or some time with their local policing teams. Normally the response teams, but potentially the neighbourhood teams as well. So there's a ride-along scheme which is well established, and you can come and experience what it's like to work as a Gloucestershire Constabulary officer or member of staff on a shift. The independent advisory groups. So we have 7 members at the moment of independent advisory groups. Now they provide a critical role to us in Gloucestershire Constabulary because they are able to provide some independent scrutiny and advice as members of the community about our policing and our policing style. So for instance, during the pandemic and and other serious events where the police were excavating a cafe in Gloucestershire, we have gold groups. And members of those gold groups include the independent advisory group members who are able to advise us on our policing style and perhaps what the communities may make of certain policing actions. So jumping over to the top left there, why wouldn't we then have a youth advisory group? So this would be a group of people aged 16 to 25 who again would be able to provide to the police some independent oversight and advice on how we police children of that age or young adults of that age. Certain powers we use, things like stopping and search, may affect that community more. So why wouldn't we have a group of individuals volunteering their time to assist us to make sure we get our policing style right? And then finally, on the right-hand side, Neighbourhood Watch and Your Community Alerts. Bob's done a wonderful job explaining that. We're desperate to grow those as well because it ultimately helps people build communities and keep people safe. Our youth offer, I've talked about the cadets. At the moment, we don't have enough volunteering schemes to capture children at a younger age. So we're looking at growing the police cubs and mini police and junior wardens. These would be for children 8 to 11 years old. And I'm glad to say we've got 12 police cubs starting in September from a school in Gloucester and another 12 starting in January next year. We want to grow that across schools, across the county. And finally, on the left-hand side, having a proper work experience programme that actually gives people the opportunity to come for a period of time and work within the police and understand what it's like to be a Gloucestershire police officer, PCSO or member of staff. So we want to deliver a scheme that allows people to really understand what it's like to be a police officer before they then make the decision to hopefully come and join us. Next slide, please. This is perhaps the biggest area that I think that we can exploit in terms of police volunteers. So this is employer-supported policing. And we will shortly have someone in post targeting employers across the county to see whether they will sign up to this scheme. Very briefly, employer-supported policing is where employers agree to sign up to the scheme whereby they will give members of their staff up to 12 paid days a year to work with the local constabulary. So as you can imagine, across the county, we've got big employers such as GCHQ, we've got universities, the Royal Agricultural University and colleges, who hopefully will want to fulfil their civic duty as employers and to provide that effort to the local policing through the employer-supported policing programme. Gloucestershire Constabulary itself is signed up to this programme, so members of our staff can work as specials or work within the constabulary as part of their paid employee. Okay, next slide please. And finally, what's our commitment to you? So it's all very well me standing here asking you to give your time and your skills to policing. What's our commitment back to you? And I would say that you have the ability to specialise. So we will consider what skills you currently have. Members of our special constabulary operate drones, they investigate accidents on roads, and they have the ability to form teams to go and arrest the most prolific offenders in our communities, and the real ability now to specialise as members of the constabulary. That's the investment we try and give our volunteers. We'll give you the training you need, the equipment you need, and the support you need through our welfare schemes, through our occupational health departments, and everything else it means to be an employee of Gloucestershire Constabulary. We can promise you some job satisfaction, feeling that you've fulfilled your civic duty, feeling that you're part of the policing family. And we will value the skill sets that you bring to us and hopefully develop your skills further in other areas of policing. That's it from me. Please take some time to think. Register with James at the back, any interest you have, but please come and join us and support us in this massively important thing called policing. Thank you.
Before I wrap up, I just wanted to mention something that I have specific responsibility for as the Police and Crime Commissioner, which is independent custody visitors. We have a very smart custody centre which can take up to 50 offenders. And we have a group of people who can visit the custody centre and check that they're being looked after in the way that they need to be looked after. Very important part of the system. So that's another area you can volunteer for if you're interested. And we've also got a scheme that looks at animal welfare as well. Next, please. And really, in summary, my vision that I would love to see is that people would step up to the plate and volunteer to be a special constable or a volunteer police community support officer. I'm kind of thinking someone semi-retired, retired, got a bit of time on their hands, reasonably fit, they love their community, they probably already do something on a volunteer basis. But this would be a formal role. The special constable is more involved than the volunteer police community support officer, which is less training, not quite higher standard on physical fitness. So a range of solutions depending upon who you are. And you would be embedded within your community. The Chief has assured me that those, what I would call parish constables, would not be redeployed except in exceptional circumstances. So they would be embedded in your communities, in your wards, in your parishes, and be the focus and centre of a much wider and larger police team as we expand the constabulary with 300 more officers. So they would be the nub, the centre of a wheel. And they would drive things like the growth of neighbourhood watch, grow community alerts, run perhaps your community speed watch systems, encourage people to join cadets, and really grow our volunteer community as part of the community you live in, and make a real difference to your personal safety. That's my vision. I hope it interests at least some of you. If not, perhaps yourselves, you may know of someone else who could be interested in those sort of things. So have a think, please. It's been brilliant that you've all stayed the evening and listened and provided some of the most interesting questions that we've had so far. Myself and my staff and the constabulary will stay as long as is necessary to carry on the great mingle and answer questions. We've got all the stands around the sides and they look forward to any further questions that you've got, and then I hope you have a safe journey home. Thank you.